The Secrets of Movies and TV Shows is brought to you by the StarQuest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give. You're listening to The Secrets of Movies and TV Shows. Hi, I'm Dom Bettinelli, and you're listening to The Secrets of the Godfather, where we will discuss the hidden layers and deeper meanings of this movie, as if no one else has ever done that before, right? No one's ever talked about the hidden layers and deeper meanings. We're going to go in a different direction, perhaps, than other people have. And joining me today on the panel are Mike Creevy. Hi, Mike.
Hello.
And Father Michael Gossett. Hi, Father Michael.
Hi, Dom. I'm so excited about this.
Me too. And Andrew Hermes. Hi, Andrew.
Hey, Dom. How's it going?
Excellent. Before we get started, folks, remember to like The Secrets of Movies and TV Shows on our Facebook page, facebook.com/StarQuestMedia. Retweet the show on Twitter, where we're at SQPN, and leave us comments. We love to get your feedback, and hopefully we get a little time at the end. I've got some feedback from some listeners on our previous shows that I'd like to share with you. We love to have feedback and create this conversation and community. So let's get into this one of the greatest American movies of all time. Let's just say it. And so I want to start by finding out when you guys first saw this. When was the first time you had seen The Godfather, and maybe how often have you seen it? So, Andrew, I know you're a movie buff. You studied film, right?
Yes, I did.
All right. So
I went to film school.
This is in your wheelhouse. So when did you see it first? How many times have you seen The Godfather?
I've seen The Godfather at least a dozen times in my lifetime, and probably more than that. Like seeing fragments of it. Yeah. You know, AMC always plays it a lot. They tend to do a marathon randomly. So growing up, I would always catch it on TV. You know, maybe halfway through, or maybe from the beginning, but rarely. But yeah, definitely. I can't remember the first time I saw it. I know I was probably way too young. The first time I saw it, probably in middle school, I would guess.
Awesome.
My parents were really cool with me watching rated R movies from a very young age. So, and I always had an early appreciation for film. So, yeah, and film school, it's definitely a movie we always studied and went back to, and I don't think that's a surprise to anyone.
Yeah, it's a masterclass in filmmaking. Father Michael, how about you?
Similar way to Andrew, I think it was kind of always in the background, just being on TV and things like that growing up. But I don't think I really noticed it until I didn't go to film school, but I took a film class in college, and we watched the baptism scene. And then, one of those Thanksgivings, I was home for break, and AMC played all three of them in a row, and I think I sat and watched all three of them in a row.
So there you go.
It really, understanding a little bit more about it made me appreciate it a whole lot more, and then I've loved it ever since.
Nice. And Mike, how about you?
Similar to both you guys, I think, and although I must say, Father, watching them back to back, I mean that's you're probably pushing 9 hours or so at that point. So, but I'd say high school for sure, maybe a little bit before that. And it's hard to say how many times I've seen them now. I think I've seen the first two a couple more times than the third one. But I would not be surprised if it's close to 10 at this point. So yeah.
Wow. So my name being Domenico Bettinelli, Sicilian family. My dad knows guys. I'm of that certain age that I was born just before the movie came out. You can imagine I must have seen this like so many times. This was my first time. I had never seen the movie before.
I don't know. I'm pretty sure that's a sin, right?
This is my public confession. I don't. It's like I hadn't seen Casablanca before I met my wife, and one of our first dates, she was like, "Okay, we're sitting down and watching Casablanca. How could you have not seen Casablanca?" And it's just one of the things. My dad and I watch all kinds of classic movies together, but there's these gaps. And I just think it's because everybody had seen it and I hadn't, and just that's how it was. So I am so glad that I've watched it now, because this was an awesome movie. So let's talk a little bit about the background for this movie. It based on a book by Mario Puzo. It's a 3-hour movie, no less than 3 hours. Released in 1972, directed by Francis Ford Coppola with an all-star cast. This cast is incredible. The music is amazing. I've spent the last 40 minutes or so listening to the soundtrack, getting myself pumped up. The music by Nino Rota, classic. Everybody recognizes it. The Godfather waltz is the mafia music now. Like everybody hears that and they know what it means. Da 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 da. And everybody goes, oh! Like, actually, in my house, like with my father's brothers, somebody walks in, they're in a nice suit, they go da 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 da. Like, oh, it's wearing a mob suit. It's just the way it is. So amazing. A movie that came out in 72. It's regularly regarded as if not the greatest American movie, in the top 5. Although there is some controversy. Godfather 2 is, I think, considered better. Guys, Godfather 2 better than Godfather 1?
I think they said it was the first sequel to win an Oscar for Best Picture, right? Something like that. Though it's not very common.
Yeah.
I think it's better. I think part 2 is slightly better. Okay. They're both in my top 5.
Yeah.
But
slightly is a good word.
Yeah. And then other aspects of the background, things like the Italian American culture that we see in it, the food, lots of food, all kinds of food. When Clemenza is making the spaghetti sauce and telling Michael how to make it, this whole although that's a simple sauce. I mean, a real Sicilian sauce has more to it, but you wouldn't go wrong with what he did. So food, lots of food, and then there's the other part of it, which really strikes home for us, which is the faith aspect. And there's something about these mobsters, these violent mobsters, and let's be honest, as gentlemanly even as Vito Corleone looked to be, these were violent guys, and they were regularly violating the 10 Commandments, and yet there was a certain kind of piety to what they did. There was a certain kind of deference to the Catholic faith. What do you think about this tension between those two things?
Well, it seems like it's almost there's sort of a superstitious nature, and in this movie and in a lot of mob movies, when you see Catholicism brought into it, that we need to go through these motions and we need to sort of pay our dues spiritually so things don't go wrong, that there are lines you don't cross. And even it struck me watching it this time, we see them hurting each other and committing great acts of violence against each other. We don't see a lot of the other crimes they commit, but there are lines for them. And especially in this movie, that Vito has a line, a moral line that he doesn't want to cross. And I think that Catholicism plays into it, that with everything they do, and we can't condone any of it, there's still this sort of background of, well, there are things you have to do that are inherently right or inherently just part of how you should live. And coming out of where they all came from, and if you watch further back in the movie, seeing kind of the homeland and everything, that Catholicism was just there. It was built in. It was part of the culture, and continued for Italian Americans when they came here.
You mentioned something that kind of struck a note with me, which is not exactly related to this, but you never actually see any of the criminal activity that they do apart from the stuff that they do to each other. You don't see the crimes that they're committing. You don't see the the gambling, the rum running, or any of that stuff, do you? I'm curious, why do you think that is? Why do you think Coppola does not show any of that?
I have a theory, but I'm the least expert here, so I'll just throw this out there, because I wonder if it's or part of it could be so much of it seems so relational, and that it's the importance of the family, and in a sense really kind of what you might call like an idolization of the family. It's almost like a a really, really, really blown out of proportion and misapplied sense of honoring your father and mother. I mean, to this sort of like, expanded to everything being about the family, even beyond any notion of outside authority, law, order, anything like that. So I almost wonder if they might mention the, like the union stuff, the having congressmen on the payroll, all these kinds of things in the context of that, but that's not the focus. I wonder. That's kind of my take on it.
Yeah, I feel like that Coppola's idea here, and Puzo, because he also helped write the screenplay with Coppola, it was to focus on these relationships. That it's really what's most interesting is not the business part of being a mobster. What's most interesting, except for the talking about it, like with Sollozzo and the drug running, but it's the relationships, the family relationship, right down to the fact that there are 5 families in New York City. So you have these family relationships. We should probably talk a little about that. That idea of the 5 families is actually real. There were 5, and I think still are to a large degree, 5 Italian families, mob families, that basically run the criminal business in New York City. New York was a special case. Other cities around the country, like Boston, they had like a family that actually covered Boston and Providence and some of that. But New York was such a big base for them that the 5 families divided up the city in a sense. Vegas is another one where the mob families divided up control. So it's interesting that it's so much of this it says it's about family, but it's like you say, it's a distorted view of family. You have a loyalty to family that goes beyond what's healthy. It's because you're not seeking the good of the other at that point. The family is even above the good of the other or good of the self. So that's a good point. Interesting point.
And it's so easy to get out of the family in so many ways. And the guy that was supposed to drive Vito when Vito got shot,
Paulie,
immediately killed. And just that sort of that loyalty is not universal and it's not absolute. And it kind of just made me think of how like so many virtues can be turned into vices by making them the most important thing. And kind of that, like you said, that idea of like, well, we take care of our own to the exclusion of everything else. And even when it hurts, you get cast out of it, is just, a virtue gone wrong.
That's a good point. Yeah, virtues taken to an extreme can become a vice, and that's what it is. Loyalty is good, but loyalty to the extreme means that individuals get sacrificed. And they didn't trust Paulie. They figured Paulie must have turned over Vito. Must have turned on Vito because he was out sick that day. The same thing with Tessio and his betrayal at the end. They just, hey, it's just business, nothing personal. And you keep hearing that over and over again. It's just business. It wasn't personal. We're still friends, even though I tried to kill you. It's just like, I'm not sure we could still be friends, but okay.
Yeah, I think another aspect of that too, why they concentrated so much more on the family and the relationships is in order to sympathize with these characters that, are capable of all these evil things and are doing all these evil things. It's better that the viewer doesn't really see what's happening. I mean, gangster films, like the really classic gangster films during the era of the Hays Code, when the Motion Picture Association had a code, you couldn't portray gangsters as sympathetic or empathetic figures. That was part of the code. So when you would watch classic gangster films, they would just be the bad guys, and they were bad guys. The Godfather, why it was such a turning point for gangster dramas and kind of led the way for, the later Scorsese films like Goodfellas and for The Sopranos, is that it allowed you to have sympathy for these characters, even though they are at their at the end of the day they're bad people that do bad things, and I think that as you see them do these horrible things, it kind of heightens, like when Michael turns, and then spoiler for Godfather 2, when he ultimately kills his brother. when those events take place, it's felt more on a deeper level. It's like he didn't just do this because it's, as they say, as you just said, it's not just, it's all business. No, it's not. It's really personal. And they just pretend to be cold and harsh. But I think that allows those events to really take center stage in a gangster film.
That's interesting. Yeah, it is really the rise of the era of the anti-hero at this point with these movies. With the code changing, is now you can have these. The audience can be put in this uncomfortable position of rooting for the bad guy. Like, no, he's a bad guy who should get caught, but I like him. Why do you have to be a bad guy? So yes, we see that quite often in movies these days. Almost too many anti-heroes almost. But like I think like with Breaking Bad and some of those TV shows, even these anti-heroes that you root for but don't want to root for. So very interesting. And then you have the whole Godfather relationship. Godfather is a sacramental relationship. It's someone who during the sacrament of baptism stands up and enters into a relationship with a family and this child who's becoming part of the family of God. And you are saying, I'm standing there to witness to faith with this child. And it gets twisted and turned, and now it becomes this thing where, like right at the beginning, the Godfather and this I forget the reason, but the Undertaker, to whose child the Godfather is Godfather, Don Corleone is the Godfather, and they have this relationship, and he gets mad at him because, hey, you come to me, I'm the godfather to your child, you disrespect me in this way, and all this stuff, and it's this relationship is important to the point where at the end, where Michael's journey has become complete, he has taken up his lightsaber to slay the Emperor, to use another movie, and his just journey to the dark side is complete. He has become quite literally the Godfather. It's not subtle like that, but that's okay. And it's so interesting. So this idea of this faith relationship that's taken to an extreme and twisted into something else.
Well, and if we'll come back and forth this, I'm sure, throughout, but something that kind of comes up, I think, the more I watch it with his arc, especially, is when Michael's sitting there at the wedding. And you see his reluctance, and you see this, it gets fleshed out more and more, like that he doesn't want to be part of that world. As he says to Kay, that's my family, Kay, that's not me, and you really get the sense that he means it. He's this World War II vet, he's at this stage of his life. And by the end of it, being in a sense more brutal, than his father ever was, and that gets fleshed out again, more spoilers, in the next two movies, especially the second one. But I often think of that, it makes me think about that, except for the grace of God, there go I thing, because I don't know, I think it's just worth thinking about, like how we judge what we would really do. Oh, I wouldn't do this, I wouldn't do that. I think it's good to meditate on, it's there's a lot of things in play, in our lives like that. And I think it really shows that well.
That's a good segue into the next part I want to talk about, which is the structure of the movie. Because I want to talk a little about the wedding scene right there in the beginning. The movie is the journey of Michael Corleone. It is really the journey of Michael Corleone from where he is at the beginning of the movie to full-fledged Dawn at the end of the movie. And the first part of the movie is, the first half hour of the movie, I mean, it's just astounding, I can't imagine what it was like for them to film this wedding scene, Connie's wedding, Michael's sister, the daughter of the Dawn, and you have this huge American wedding. It's an Italian-American wedding, but it's this huge wedding. And it contrasts, which we'll get to, with a second wedding in the film, which is Michael's wedding in Sicily. The first wedding, we don't see the church. There is no religious significance to it. It's all cultural. It's all party. It's all, you have business. You have the heads of the families there. They even say right up front, a Don cannot refuse a request on the day of his daughter's wedding. So it's business. It's very, very much business. And then you have Michael there, like you mentioned, in his Marine Corps uniform. He's an American war hero with his very American girlfriend. Michael is as far from being part of that family as he can be, even to the point where he's literally not in the picture. Like they're taking a family picture. He's literally not in the picture and has to be dragged in, and even drags Kay with him into the picture. And it's a very interesting moment in contrast with where we are later. What about this? So the wedding sets the tone. It establishes the world. We're immediately post World War II. It's 1946, I think, as we begin. We see all the key characters. We get their characterization. Sonny's a hothead and kind of a jerk. He believes, his wife is there and he's off with one of the bridesmaids, doing whatever. You got Tom Hagen, the outsider who's been made an insider in the family. He's the consigliere. You get all these different characters established right there at the beginning. What do you guys think of this first part of the movie, this first scene, really?
That the very first moment, and I mean, I notice new things every time, and I'm sure a million people on the internet have talked about these things, but the first line is, "I believe in America," and that it's that amazing, like it's pulling away from the Undertaker talking until you finally see Don Vito listening to him, but just that "I believe in America," and then he goes on and on about how America's failed him, and that really does set up so much of the idea that, well, the mafia exists because they take care of things that the institutions won't, and that's why he goes to the Godfather. But and like Andrew mentioned before, just the lighting, that it's this dark scene compared to the bright wedding outside, that you really get before you meet the whole family. You're right in the midst of, like, this is what this setup is. This is what this relationship that the Godfather has with his family and kind of the community. This is what it looks like.
It's the deals done in the dark. Yeah.
The first scene, what's interesting, as Father pointed out, again, it's this big, bright, extravagant wedding. And when you're first introduced to Michael, who, again, this movie is ultimately about, you see him bright-faced out in the sun, obviously an outsider looking in. And as the movie progresses, you'll notice that the lighting on Michael becomes progressively darker, more shadows. He becomes more and more like his father. And I think that scene is pivotal because at the end of the day, they're a big Italian family. It sets the sets the course going forward, that everything that happens from now on, from this celebration going forward, it shows you the facade that's going on. And then this is something that they do only when someone gets married, when someone gets baptized, obviously later in the film. These joyous, happy moments, are just there. But everyone knows what's going on. That's why I think it's interwoven with the scene with Vito, handing out favors. It's the ultimate theme of all three films. It's good versus evil. It's the happiness and the good of the wedding ceremony compared to the underbelly of the gangster world. So I think that just it's a perfect setup for the rest of the franchise.
There's a thin veneer of joy and happiness and good over this layer of evil that's happening. Yeah.
Yes.
And the only thing I would add, and I don't know if I'm reading too much into this, and it's difficult to disjoint the discussion from what happens in 2 and 3 as well, to see them all as kind of one big storyline. But I find it very, without ruining the end of the third one, because I
try not to spoil me.
No, I know, but to see it all like that, I think this makes a little more sense. But I found it interesting that when you look at like a lot of classic literature, even look at like Lord of the Rings, for example, or certainly like the Bible, there's this recurring motif that I think we're all kind of primed for. to have, some sort of launching point, and there's struggle and turmoil, and then, you often see this theme of the big bright ending at some kind of wedding.
Right.
I find it interesting that this starts at this big happy wedding. and it's almost like this inverse, which you see play out more and more, that it's my read, at least a little bit on, I think you can at least make an argument for that you have this up front and then things just kind of deteriorate. It's like the exact opposite of how it's supposed to be, kind of thing. So that hit me this time, something I want to think about a little more.
Almost like Dante's journey into hell,
right.
that idea. Yeah. That's a very interesting connection.
And it kind of that over the course of the film, just like sin isolates people.
Yeah.
That Michael's already separate from his family because of this, but it gets to him too.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah. I mean, even when you talk about sin isolates people, you have Connie's husband, the groom at this wedding, is a horrible person. I mean, at one point, Sonny beats the heck out of him, and he deserves it because he beats his wife, which is like his pregnant wife. But he beats his. But yet, by the end of the film, he's the one. He's still in the family. He's still got a purpose that Michael has for him. He's still still there, and it's like this guy, of anybody, should be on the outs. Now, I'm not saying he should be killed. I'm not going to say that, but I'm saying he should be like, all right, there's the door. Go through it. Never come back. We never want to see you again. That sort of thing. But there's that. They're isolated in the sense of people who should be isolated should be cast out. People who are bad are kept close, and you can see by the end, when you talk about isolated, right at the very end where you have Kay, I think Kay is realizing what she's gotten herself into as that door closes on the Don's office, which is now Don Michael's office, and the door closes between her and Michael. I mean, hello, that's an interesting bit of symbolism there. That is very clearly that isolation. She's being isolated from him in this moment. And I mean, you could write a book about the relationship between Kay and Michael in this movie. I mean, that's a whole nother aspect to it.
Real quick, if I may, but just when we talked about the cultural impact of this movie, and it's just the one good example of that, how it's just all over the place. There's a really hilarious parody, like frame for frame parody of that beating scene in The Simpsons, where Marge like goes after like some homeless guy tries to like accost her, and it's like shot for shot.
Yeah. Remember that.
You got to look that up on YouTube later. It's
pretty... that's so funny. Yeah. Oh yeah. That would be good. That'd be funny. So, I would say that this first part of the film, this establishing sequence, doesn't end until after the whole LA bit. So Johnny Fontaine, played by Al Martino, the singer, is looking for a part. He's the Don's godson, right? I think he's a godson too. But he's got a relationship with them. So Don Corleone, Don Vito, sends Tom Hagen out to LA to talk to this movie studio exec, who just flat out refuses. What are you going to do, you big gangster? To me, I'm a big, powerful man in LA, in Hollywood. You can't do anything to me. And then the famous, the horse. Like, as soon as you see the horse, as soon as I saw it, I'm like, oh, that's the horse. That's what's going to happen. Yeah. I mean, this is a scene that traumatized a generation of moviegoers. I mean, I can imagine when people saw this in the theater, they freaked out at this. And it's probably the bloodiest scene in the movie. I think, like, even when Sonny gets gunned down, it's pretty blood. I mean, there's a little bit of blood, but it's not that gory. This is like this bed is filled with blood. I mean, there's no way. I could not figure out how they could have in real life pulled this off without the guy waking up. But it's effective in in the horror of it. But I think it sets that tone for the whole movie of, you think you have these nice gangsters, but what they really are, they're not good people. They're going to, when they want to get their way, they're going to do whatever it takes to get their way. And I mean, it's a pretty, it sort of ends that sequence that starts with the wedding and happy.
And it's the great contrast of that horrible scene with Tom Hagen is nothing but polite to that man.
Oh, yes.
The whole time.
The whole movie. Yeah.
Says he loves his movies and like shakes his hand.
Yeah. Right.
And I think it's pretty obvious. It's pretty obvious Johnny Fontaine is Frank Sinatra.
Yes. Yeah. That seems pretty clear.
Guys, I just saw today for the first time. I read on the Wikipedia thing or something. I'd never heard this before. At least Wikipedia said that was a real horse head.
Yeah, I saw that.
That was like from some. I mean, this is early 70s. I don't know, but from some like dog food, company. Like it was already dead or something. But he got in big trouble, I guess, for using
a real horse head.
I don't know. That's the first I heard.
That looked pretty real.
That would never happen today, I'm sure.
No.
Wow.
Oh no.
Yeah, I'm going to guess they didn't get that little American Humane Society label at the end of the credits.
I don't think so.
Probably not.
I don't think so.
So then the second big part of the movie, the first turning point, the thing that sets off everything is when Sollozzo meets with the Don. He wants the Don to bankroll his drug business. And I think it's important to point out that around this time, the mid to late 40s, this was when the mob started to get into the drug trade in a big way. Before this, they were in the unions and they were the gambling and prostitution and other things. I mean, prostitution was bad, but it was a bad human cost. But the other things were seen as, well, no, it's a vice, but it's not a bad, like, people know what they're doing when they get into gambling. It's the only victim is the person who wants to gamble. And so it was kind of turned a little blind eye to. But drugs, as we know, they decimated cities, and and the Don, I think he knows this. I mean, we're told he kind of knows this, and he knows that if he gets into the business, his big thing is the influence he has on congressmen, on politicians and judges. And he knows that if he gets involved in drugs, those guys are not going to want to have anything to do with him anymore. And so you have this key moment where Sollozzo needs the Don's connections, but the Don says, if I get into business with you, I will lose those connections. They'll be useless to both of us. So, but this, if he agrees with this, none of the other stuff happens. The Vito doesn't get gunned down on the street. Michael doesn't end up turning to the dark side. We don't have any of this stuff happen. But because he refuses, that's what sets all this off. And in one way, you could say because he does the right thing, which is I don't want to get involved in drugs, that causes all the bad stuff. Now, of course, you could say he was doing the right thing in a bad business. So what do you expect? It's the fruit of evil. But so what do you think? Is this the key to the whole movie? This scene with Sollozzo in the meeting?
Definitely up till that point, we're kind of just like experiencing the family, and I really like that so much of the first part of the movie is just like, these are these people. This is how they relate to each other. That like Sonny's the hothead and Fredo's kind of slow and Michael's not part of this, and just like these are how they relate to each other. And then suddenly, yeah, I think you're right. Just that this is the action that makes them have to deal with. This is who they are and the life that they live and what it means in the world.
Yeah, I think this scene is obviously very pivotal because it kind of sets the course for another pivotal scene that I know we'll get to in retaliation to Sollozzo. It kind of shows that Vito can see that the gangster life and the gangster business is changing. It's not something he wants to be a part of. It's again, it goes back to this code that he has. There are lines that he won't cross, and drugs is one of them, for personal reasons and for business reasons and political reasons. And it's you'll see in the rest of this film and part 2 and part 3 the ramifications of this scene and this turning point in the gangster business. Just shows how much more messy the gangster life becomes.
Right. And then when Michael becomes Tony Montana, and no, wait, I'm sorry, that's a whole nother. It's a whole nother movie, and we're probably not going to do a sequence on that one. So just so you know. So that's what this scene leads to. the assassination attempt on Vito, the killing of Luca Brasi, who, I just got a soft spot for Luca. I just felt bad that poor Luca. When he had to go in and had rehearsed that speech for the Don at the wedding. I mean, the big galoot. I mean, the poor guy. I mean, so they take him out because they know they're going to take him out early. And then you have all these scenes where Michael, when his father is shot, Michael has to, Sonny is just a crazy person. He flies off the rails. But Michael is the one who's smart and cool and calm. He's most like his father in that sense. And the whole business at the hospital, he's the one who saves his father at the hospital. He's the one. And then we come to the second turning point in this movie, which I would say it's one of two moments, and you guys we can talk about what you think it might be. It's either when Michael kills Sollozzo in the Italian restaurant and makes his bones. He really crosses over. That's the defining moment when Michael has crossed over into that world. Or it could be the day when he finds out within minutes Sonny has been killed back in the States, and Michael's in Sicily, and then his new bride Apollonia is killed in the car bomb that was meant for him. And that could be the other moment that really cements him in, this is my path. What do you think which one do you think more is that real second turning point in the film?
I think it's hard to say. Well, I mean, with any certainty, this is one of those kind of like you said, it might be just kind of an opinion thing. For my part, on this watching at least, and trying to think about that, I think it's the sort of double assassinations. Because I don't know, I got the feel, some of those long walks he's on, some of his situation in Sicily, like you can kind of see, I think at least there's something in him that's toying with the notion of staying there. You know what I mean? Like this is his time to really make this clean break. There's people that know he's there and that sort of thing, but it's that return to the old country kind of thing. It's probably the biggest. I mean, he might as well be on the moon in terms of a difference, in the setting and some of the culture, even though there's that connection there. But I don't know. That was my thought kind of this time.
It made me think, it questioned, like, when he went to Sicily, did he think he was going to start a new life there? That this marriage with Apollonia, that this was going to be that he was done with all that now. Because it kind of makes you question, like, he had done this terrible act, but what was in his mind, as how would he move past it? What would be his life? What would his life be like now that he's out of there?
What do you think, Andrew?
Yeah, I have sort of a different take on the whole Sicily portion of the film. Well, first of all, I think the scene with Sollozzo and Michael, killing Sollozzo. I don't think that was the real turning point. I think, by the way, that scene is probably arguably the best scene in the whole movie.
Yeah, I agree.
Because with the tension and building up to it, and going to the bathroom and the gun's not there.
Your heart's racing.
Yeah.
And the dialogue in Italian without subtitles, which I think was brilliant, because what they're saying isn't important. And in fact, by not understanding it, you have to pay attention to the body language, and the acting, especially Pacino, was superb. You could see him. Michael is both resolute and afraid. He's tentative, yet he's trying not to let Sollozzo and McCluskey know. I mean,
he keeps looking away, like he can't look at them.
Yes, yes.
And that goes away. It does eventually go away.
Right.
Yeah, it's a brilliant scene, like from beginning to end. But yeah, I would say his time in Sicily, I think that's where he connects most with his father, because he's now, where he's in the town of Corleone, or
a town named Corleone.
Yeah, exactly. So his roots are literally there. So I think that time that he spends there, it's him morphing more into his father. Like he was in love with Kay, and all of a sudden he's gonna marry a traditional Sicilian wife, like his father did, that a wife that would always look the other way, if whenever he's doing his business, probably wouldn't even care if he had a mistress, So I think that time kind of was the first sort of push into like his transformation, and then obviously once Sonny and Apollonia gets assassinated, then that kind of really poured gasoline onto the fire, so to speak, and he became the new Don.
I agree. I think that, in fact, the wedding to Apollonia is the second turning point. You have basically two stories. You have that first story that begins with Connie's wedding, and it's the American wedding that shows all of the prosperity that the Corleones have had in America, and yet their Italian roots. But the Sicilian wedding is reserved, traditional, simple. You see the priest, you see the blessing, you see, there's a dance at Connie's wedding. Vito dances with Connie on the dance floor. At the wedding with Apollonia, he dances with Apollonia. It's very formal and reserved, and in fact, the whole courtship is very formalized. I love that scene where they're walking down the road, and then suddenly all of the women of the family come into view, walking behind them, chaperoning them.
By the way, John, this is the first time I've ever watched the movie since I became a dad of a daughter.
Oh yeah.
So when they're talking to the old man at the restaurant, and he's like, "No one like that lives here," and he runs inside. I'm like, well, I kind of get that now.
Yeah, that was. I'm on his side. Well, especially knowing it, Sicilian guys like I do, I'm on his side. But and also Sicilian women are exactly as those guys described. You don't want to mess with them. So you have this Sicilian wedding, and it's Michael, in a sense, symbolically marrying his roots, marrying the family's ways, and that's Michael's transformation. He's left behind Kay, his American girlfriend, and taken up with Apollonia. Which I think it is an argument for why he may have been thinking that he was never going back, because he's apparently thinking he's not going to go back to Kay, but he marries her and embraces that part of his life, his family, his heritage, and that's the moment of transformation. So I agree. I think this is a fundamental change in Michael at this moment. So we have his marriage, and then the death of Apollonia and the death of Sonny, which is probably the best thing that happened to the family was that Sonny was not in charge anymore. The hot-headed Sonny. Oh, Sonny. And so this sets Michael off on the journey to become the Don. And then we have the climax of the movie. Everything sort of builds to this moment. The Don Vito, which was, I got to say, a nice scene, the scene with Don Vito and his grandson in the tomato garden, and he's playing with the kid. And I don't think that kid was acting when he was scared of Brando with the orange peel in his mouth. I think he was really expressing himself there. And I got to hand it to Brando. I mean, as crazy of a coot as he was a great actor. He was really so great in this. And
it's like one of the only genuine peace scenes in the whole,
right.
And then he dies too.
Well, he almost literally is out to pasture. I mean, you can kind of say, like, this is the Don. Like, we'd seen a couple scenes where you could tell he's kind of losing a step. He repeats himself to Michael and that sort of stuff. And Michael, respectful, loves his father, doesn't call him on it, but he knows. And so the Don, dies in this moment, dies in his garden, among his tomatoes. So how symbolic of an old Sicilian dying in his tomato patch. That was my grandfather didn't exactly die in his tomato patch, but if he could have, he would have. He was a great gardener. And so Michael takes over, and so we have it's almost a movie of sacraments. We have baptisms, funerals, and weddings. And so we've already had the weddings, and now we have the funeral and the prayers at the graveside. And this is where Michael sees who his enemies are and who's plotting to kill him. He sees Tessio, Ava Goda, who I think is still alive. I'm not sure. I should check the website. there's a website. Is Dave Vigoda still alive? If anybody's still alive,
actually, I might be wrong. I think he died very recently.
Yeah, he did. He
like,
actually did. Yeah, God rest his soul. Abe Vigoda is the best. Barney, I remember from watching Barney Miller. I'm that old. Abe Vigoda is the best. But Tessio, he knows he's in a bad position. It's either him or Clemenza have got to be the one to go to Barzini and be the one to betray him, because that means he's going to survive if they take Michael. He's making the bet that Michael is not going to survive this. He makes the wrong bet. And so Michael knows Tessio's the one. Barzini is coming for him, and Michael sets it up. So first he prepares. The family is leaving New York. That's the first big thing. And so he sets up Mo Green. Oh, Mo Green's a funny character. That scene with Fredo out there. Yeah. Fredo is the biggest.
Uncomfortable.
Oh my gosh, Fredo is such a doofus. Oh. That whole moment where the assassination attempt on Vito, and Fredo fumbles the gun, like it just it sort of tells you exactly who Fredo is in this movie. And so they set up this moment, and then we have this great scene. I love the fact that we have the whole rite of baptism. Well, not every word, but we have the rite of baptism here, and of course it's the 1962. It's the pre-Vatican II Latin baptism ceremony. But as I'm trying to look at the lines here, but as the prayer, Michael is renouncing Satan at the moment that the heads of the 5 families are being assassinated on his orders. I mean, do you renounce Satan and all his works? And he's doing Satan's work right then and there as he renounces him. I mean, this is Michael selling his soul at this moment, but also literally becoming the Godfather. So I'm monopolizing the microphone here because I'm so excited about this movie. Go ahead and jump in. Anybody have any notes they want to say about this part of the movie?
I would just say that like my niece was baptized in the extraordinary form just a couple years ago. The movie gets it right. I mean, that is the right. And I think especially significantly, like you mentioned, Dom, the godparents speak for the child. And so they don't say, baby, do you renounce Satan? It's Michael. And that's such a powerful thing that he has to say it. And I think kind of like you mentioned that when we started talking, just that the idea of the Godfather is a special role, but also like, at the beginning, Don Vito speaks for his family in so many ways. He's the Godfather for all of them. And now Michael takes on that role, and you see like he's speaking for his family that's in all these violent ways. And that kind of just he stands in, which is the Godfather's role, and stands in, and not in leading them to Christ or anything, but that selfish violence that we've been talking about.
Right, that warping of what it means to be a Godfather. But he's there. It's very interesting. How about you, Andrew? This whole scene. What can you draw anything out of this that obviously you probably have more insight into this climactic scene?
Yeah, well, again, it's the ultimate example of this ongoing theme. It's the duality of man. It's just as soon as he takes these vows, he goes right back against them, and I think the interweaving of the killings and the baptism really shows that this is the path that Michael has chosen, and ultimately this is also the moment where they take him seriously as the Don. After the 5 bosses are killed, if you notice, there's a scene before the baptism when Vito is still alive, but Michael is starting to, take the reins. He doesn't have much respect. They didn't even call him Don until after these killings took place. So I think he wanted to ultimately have the respect, other than the obvious reasons for killing the 5 bosses. He just ultimately wanted the respect that his father had. Because that's a big deal to Michael. And it also shows his coldness. I think as much as he was turning into his father, he was not his father at the same time, because his father had a genuine love for people. His father had charm, and wit, and he cared. He deeply cared for his family and his friends. Michael didn't have any friends really, and he cared for his family, probably just at a very surface level, as much as you should, type thing. But he didn't. He was very cold. He was always cold to Kay, especially. So I think that scene just ultimately revealed who Michael was going to be from now on. And obviously we see his journey unfold in part 2 and 3 as well.
Oh, and to piggyback off something Andrew said there too, the idea of how Michael's not, he has these similarities to his father, but he's this own agent. I find it kind of interesting, that at the very beginning, like we were talking about, that very first request, that we see in the first scene, the first discussion with the funeral director or the undertaker. I guess he's a funeral director, asking, Vito to kill these men who have done this terrible thing to his daughter. And Vito doesn't even budge. He just says, you're not asking for justice. Your daughter's still alive. He's like, there is no way he's going to cross that line. And you get to Michael where it's like, I'm just going to wipe out everybody I think looked at me. You know what I mean? Like we're complete clean slate, like take no chances, kill everybody. I mean, that's, you can't quite maybe, but you can't quite imagine Vito doing that. And it's like this idea that now we're in a whole new ball game, and that's going to last, as we see here, that's going to last for a long time, that reputation.
Vito knew that Barzini was ultimately behind it. It wasn't Tattaglia. It was Barzini who was ultimately behind the hit on him, and yet he didn't take action against him that way. And whereas Michael does, and it's interesting, Michael cleans house as he's leaving town. Like, and I don't mean in the figurative way. They've literally empty the house out, but he kills all of these heads of the houses on the way out of town. They're moving to Vegas. I think it's interesting that, he said, this is how I'm making the clean slate, is I'm knocking the board off the table and walking out of the room. And he's making a statement there, which I assume we're going to see the repercussions of in the next movie. So it's interesting to see that.
And it kind of ultimately shows that it's not just business. It is like deeply personal.
Right.
And he did this because of what they did to his family, but also like to him, like he sees it as an insult to him. And even though he's leaving to go start something new, he's not going to let that stand. Right.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. That's the big lie is when everyone keeps saying it's nothing personal, it's business, and it's anything but business. This is all very deeply personal. This mob war is bad for business, as we see, and it doesn't hold them back. Let me ask you a question. What is the span of time that this movie is supposed to take place over? It starts in, I think, 1946. When is that funeral scene taking place? Do you have any sense of that? Is that the mid-60s?
I think Wikipedia said 10 years, so like 55.
Yeah, the novel was 1945 to 1950. It's like fall 1945 to like 1955.
Okay, so only 10 years. Okay.
Mm-hmm. I think the second one picks up like maybe 2 or 3 years later. It's like still late 50s.
Okay. That's interesting. It just seemed like it would have encompassed a longer period of time for all those things to happen and all those kids and all that sort of stuff. But, they are Sicilian, so there's that. we like our big families. Well, let's talk a little bit about some of the way the movie was made, some of the choices that Coppola made and the cinematographer. One of the things I noticed, I'm no expert in film, but I noticed this tendency that even when the action was going on outside the frame, that Coppola always had Michael, or not always, but often had Michael stay in the center of the frame in focus. You could see his reactions. What was important was Michael, no matter all the things going on around him, that Michael was the center of the storm, was the center of the action, and I thought that was a very interesting choice on his part. Any other interesting bits of aspects of the way the movie was made that anyone else want to bring up?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the cinematography is it's a masterclass in lighting and framing, and Gordon Willis, the cinematographer of this film, he wanted to shoot this film as traditional as possible, as innovative as the film was. He wanted all the shots to be timeless. So if you notice, the camera only ever moves once, I think, in the film, and I think it's the very first shot. Every other scene is shot from ground level, stationary. Camera's not moving. There's maybe one crane shot, I think, during the first assassination attempt. But everything else is from the ground level, and what that also allows the film to do is to let the viewer see everything as it's happening, and like you said, we see a lot of it from Michael's perspective, and he's usually the center of attention if he's in the scene. An example of that is when they do the flashback of when he tells his family that he's going to join the army. If you notice, as the scene moves on, it stays focused on Michael as his family members are leaving the table. There's kind of like it's almost like a time. It just shows the passage of time. Sonny goes crazy, and then, oh, did you want to say something?
When was that scene?
I think that's in The Godfather too.
Oh, am I mixing the movies up?
No,
okay.
I think they filmed. Well, they filmed that. I want to say I read somewhere they filmed that for the first one, but they didn't use it, and then they tack it on the very end of 2 as just a way to.
Oh, okay.
Well, I take that back, but it's consistent throughout. The first film and the second film, the way it's shot. It's there's like I said, the lighting was very pivotal. Films back then, from the 60s into the 70s, were filmed very brightly. They were nice and bright, and with all the stars in this film, I mean, Al Pacino wasn't a star yet, but Marlon Brando was the greatest actor on the planet. You had James Caan, so you had all this amazing cast. And usually they would slap butter on on their faces and mayonnaise in their hair and to make them shiny. But this kind of harkened back to the old, film noir films, the first gangster films, with all the darkness and the deep shadows. Each frame is a work of art. I mean, that's sort of another thing that comes with leaving the camera stationary, is when you're doing that, your the production design, and where the actors are placed and where a painting or a piece of furniture is placed is very important. Everything matters. So if you take any frame out of that film, you could hang it up on your wall. So it's just really, again, I mean, you see the influence of this film to this day, and again with the foreshadowing. I mean, the most famous thing is like they put oranges, into a scene whenever someone's about to die. That's another thing, another choice. I've heard that it might have been just a coincidence. I don't really think so, but I've heard it both ways. That, is this a coincidence that there happen to be oranges around the time someone dies? But I think that was obviously a director's choice.
One of the things about Al Pacino in this is, at the beginning of the movie, he is not the Al Pacino I recognize. You know what I mean? Al Pacino is growly and he's sort of he's intense.
I think that's 40 more years of cigarette smoke.
Yeah, that's age. Yeah.
But even between the beginning and the end of this movie, there is a shift in Michael, in the way he's portrayed. Michael in this is very clean cut, fresh faced. By the end of this movie, he's much more the Al Pacino, not quite the same growly, pack a day smoker, Al Pacino, but he's much more that sort of gruff character that I recognize. And so I thought it was interesting. The other guy that I wouldn't have recognized if I didn't know ahead of time is Robert Duvall. Does not look like Robert Duvall of later years. I mean, just his transformation over time is remarkable. But it's a fascinating. And one of the things I want to say about this movie before we finish talking about it is culturally how this movie, and I kind of mentioned this earlier, culturally how this movie has impacted how Italian Americans see themselves. Mobsters post The Godfather consciously aped The Godfather. Like in some ways, they became more like the mobsters in The Godfather than they were in reality beforehand. I mean, it's so amazing. You know, mobsters loved this movie. They shouldn't have, and they loved it anyway, which just shows you something about mobsters. I don't want to say too much. I've known some people, let's just say, who are in that orbit, and yeah, there is some truth in a lot of what we see here. It's fascinating. That might be another reason why I hadn't watched this movie before. It's a little too close to home, but it's
well. Speaking of that a little bit, Dom, I do have a question too, because I don't know, like in my, I've always wondered, and in the research I was doing, I couldn't really find anything definitive. What was Mario Puzo's sort of background with where he got the inspiration for a lot of this? I've always wondered, because I'm sure, everybody writes what they know to some extent, you know what I mean? But I've always wondered. I just know that he was in gambling debt. Was I guess why he needed money, but that's why he jumped at the film option, I guess, for it too, like ahead of time before the book was even released. But I don't know if anyone knows that, or if that, I'm just curious about that.
I think he knew people. Because he grew up in Hell's Kitchen in New York. He knew the people who were in this stuff. This was his world. And I think they always tell you, write what you know. And I think he ended up in a lot of ways writing what he knew about, which is these mobsters in his neighborhood. You always had these guys in these smart suits. They look cool. They look dangerous a little bit. They always had the car and the girls. And they had some money. And these kids, I mean, it's not unlike what you see today with some of these urban street gangs. The kids look up to them. These are the guys with power. These are the guys with money. These guys with respect. And probably more than anything else, respect. It was what a lot of these kids craved, because unfortunately we have lived in a country where the newcomers, whether they're Irish or Italian or from Haiti or wherever, don't get the respect that the people who are already here have. And so, at that time, the Italians were looked down upon, and we reap the whirlwind for that, because we don't respect the people, and so the people go out to earn it for themselves. So something to be said about that.
It's kind of the dark side of this movie. People may be watching it and enjoying it without thinking too deeply about what's going on, that it's so cool, and they're all so cool in it. There's no denying that. But you look just below the surface of this whole story, it's like, oh, they're cool, but they're not going anywhere good in this world or the next, probably.
Right.
I kept track the whole way through it, and they broke every single commandment. So.
Yeah.
Every one of them in the film is breached somewhere.
Yes, so. That is true. That is a good point to make. Oh man. Interesting. The whole. The whole relationship with Kay, I thought was interesting, but we could come back to that. I would love to. I'm gonna watch The Godfather 2. That's just a given at this point. I have to now complete the trilogy. But
you don't have to watch 3.
Yeah, that'll be a harder conversation.
You can skip 3.
Well, it's
there's some casting issues.
Yeah, it's like we've been talking about Raiders of the Lost Ark, the Indiana Jones movies, and we're not going to do Crystal Skull. Although some people say we should, and because it'll be fun to hear us our disappointment discussed. So maybe we could do that. But I certainly need to watch at least the next one. And so maybe if you guys are interested, we'll come back and revisit that. Before we finish this discussion, any points that we didn't cover that you'd like to make sure we cover before we finish?
I think the hospital scene is one of my favorite scenes. We didn't mention that. That's such a
yes,
just like the restaurant and the shooting. It's so tense, and I think I just love especially the kind of resolution when he's out on the steps and their enemies go away, and Enzo, the baker, is so nervous he can't light his cigarette, and the whole moment is great. The whole scene is great.
It's less is more in that scene. There's not a whole lot of talking. There's not even a lot of action. There's a lot of tension. And that is something I wish more modern filmmakers would learn from the master is that often less is indeed more when it comes to this stuff. That's a good point. So before we wrap up, I do want to cover some feedback from some of our previous ones. And we've got some emails that we had when we discussed John Williams. We have a Facebook message from Amy Flowers, who writes that she says, thank you for this episode discussing John Williams. It was thorough, included the Olympics, and yet I know it could have gone on for another 2 hours. I was afraid we almost did. With every track you played, chills ran down my arms. There really could be a series of podcasts on the Star Wars films with the motifs that are sprinkled in. There actually was. We called it Secrets of Star Wars. You could find them out there on our website, and that may come back. It could. Of all his music, I have to say the opening credits to Superman the movie is my favorite. It's so theatrical. It makes you feel like you can soar. It's not the track usually noted on the soundtrack, but the actual opening credits. She says it's stunning. And then when we discussed Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, she jumped in and said, "Oh, this film, thank you for covering this amazing movie and ditching your approach in scene-by-scene summary and just getting all fanboy/girlish over it." We did. I have to admit. I really don't have much more to say other than what you've discussed. And then she goes on for 3 more paragraphs, because that's what we do. We're fanboys and girls. The film is a pure delight, centering the amazing chemistry between Sean Connery and Harrison Ford. I just want to see. She said there were some beautiful, heartfelt moments when Henry calls his son Indiana at the end after calling him Junior throughout the entire film. It shows that not only has Indy found his father, but Henry has found its son. She did point out something we didn't mention, which was that Julian Glover, who plays the bad guy Donovan, also played General Veers in Empire Strikes Back. I always have to note when we see Star Wars actors in other movies, so I have to say that. She says, thank you for bringing up some of the faith elements, but also realizing it's a movie and the mythology presented in the film should be taken as the fluff as it is. Yes, that's true. That's how our approach to all these things is. We know that Hollywood is not out to make theological films about Christianity, but we love to find those layers. As Terry Mattingly, the religion news writer, calls it the ghosts of Christianity that we find in these things. That Christianity is there in a lot of these ways, even when not intended or not done well in some cases. So she would like us to do a discussion of the Grail, Holy Grail, on a future episode of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, and you can bet that that's on the long list of topics. So she did, and then she included a photo of her standing outside the church/library, which is now a museum for Leonardo da Vinci artwork in Venice. And then a couple more. Scott S. sends an email. It was enjoyable listening to you guys talk about all 3 Indiana Jones movies. I think my favorite of the movies would have to be Last Crusade. I think you guys should actually do the 4th movie. He was the one who said we should do that. It would be interesting to get a full review from you guys after listening to the most recent episode of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, the one where we talked about the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Copper Scroll. If you guys haven't listened to that, you should. I think they should do an Indiana Jones movie about the Copper Scroll. That's not a bad idea. I still think they should do an Indiana Jones in the Search for Excalibur, but that's me. And then finally, Bennett says on our Coffee and Cinema episode, Captain Marvel, where Father Chip and I go watch a movie, then sit down at a coffee shop and give our first quick impressions. He says, I appreciate the idea to mix things up and increase the spontaneity, but for me personally, I think I prefer the long form. Well, you get both, Bennett, now. So that's good. Easier on the ears and more time for contemplative thought, which prompts me more. So if people did enjoy that, we just did one last week on Shazam. Father Chip and I went and saw Shazam. So if you hadn't subscribed and listened to that yet, go check it out. It was a lot of fun to record that. All right, so that's our feedback. And like I said, we'd love to hear from you. But before we sign off, I do want to say thank you to our patrons who make it possible for us to create the secrets of movies and TV shows. Today, I want to thank by name Clifton E., Daniel D., Kelly B., Max S., and Rochelle K. Through their generous donations at sqpn.com/give, they make it possible for us to continue the secrets of movies and TV shows and all the shows we do at SQPN at StarQuest Media. You can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. So that's it from us. What do you think of The Godfather? Is it an okay movie? What do you think of what we had to say? I'm sure there's a lot of you out there have an opinion about that. Let us know by going to sqpn.com/secrets or the StarQuest Facebook page. Leave us some feedback there or send an email to secrets@sqpn.com. Until next time, Father Michael Gossett, thank you for joining me and sharing the secrets of The Godfather.
Thank you so much.
Andrew Hermes, thank you as well.
Thank you. This was fun.
Mike Creevy, and thank you.
Thank you, Dom. Pleasure as always.
And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to the secrets of movies and TV shows on StarQuest. And you better leave a 5-star review on iTunes, because I'm going to make you an offer you cannot refuse.